When the Hoi 4 DLC Trial of Allegiance came out, many people were quick to call out and criticize it. The primary complaints revolved around a few issues. 1. The DLC only includes focus trees and no real gameplay changes, and since it only focuses on South America, which is seen as the least impactful area of the world during World War II, this isn't enough to justify most people buying it at its price point. 2. As with any DLC, it has a myriad of bugs and focuses and decisions that don't work how they really should. Some of these have been fixed, and a lot of others still haven't. And 3. The massive buffs that absolutely broke the balance of the game and made world conquests, as well as achievements for all of the South American countries, incredibly easy. Since the release, the buffs to the military national ideas have been reduced to a slightly more acceptable area, and yet there's one buff that's only recently come to my attention that is often overlooked and hasn't been addressed to my knowledge, and that is the massive buffs to industry. Now, every country has industry focuses that generally just give direct factories, and more recently, focuses that add construction speed, production efficiency, and many other smaller bonuses. For example, Bulgaria is able to hire an advisor. After a lot of political power investment, that increases factories in a state, which is really helpful for Bulgaria as a small country that only starts with 4 states. Basically, the smaller the nation, the more buffs they generally need to be able to compete with the major powers. The problem comes from when these secondary powers that were already in a well-off position get too much of a buff, as is the case with primarily Brazil in Trial of Allegiance. Going forward, I will be looking at a very small part of this industrial overtuning that has been happening in these recent DLCs, that being an increase in the number of build slots and how strong a country's economy can be. I will be calling the total number of build slots a country has economic capacity, or EC. For example, the US, starting in 1936, has an EC of 262, meaning that if they get no more build slots for the rest of the game, they can build up to 262 factories in their land. For reference, the British mainland has an EC of 106, Germany 170, and Japan 111. Of course, smaller countries have fewer states and generally a smaller population, which contributes, of course, to a smaller EC. So, Argentina, Brazil, and Chile have 34, 43, and 25 EC respectively, at least at the start of the game. This starting EC is determined by the number of states a country has, the region type of those states, and any of those states' modifiers. For example, the US has 53 starting states, one of which is New York, which has the region type megalopolis, giving 12 building slots and thus 12 EC. The German state of Hessen has 9 building slots, being a dense urban region, which provides 8 building slots. However, this state also has a dam, which gives an extra 15% building slots. Now, EC is not the be-all end-all. As I said earlier, focus trees have been focusing on other ways to buff countries other than just spamming them with build slots and factories. This is just one of the many metrics with which you can measure the strength of a nation. Notably, in the late game, countries with a higher EC are more likely to become majors and thus prevent peace deals. You probably recognize this when you're playing, and suddenly the Raj becomes a major in the Allies, and you just want to die. This happens partly because of the EC of the Raj that they're able to meet the industrial requirement for becoming a major. Countries, of course, do have ways to increase their EC. They can get double their build slots from researching all of either dispersed or concentrated industry. They can get an additional +1 in each state from taking the decision granted by having max infrastructure, and another +1 from taking the decision that costs stability and war support when you're at war. I will not be looking at puppets or expansion and annexation for ways to increase economic capacity because of the many complexities that come with that. Without accounting for focuses, these bonuses would bring the US EC to 627 at max, or 655 when accounting for historical focuses. The UK goes to 264, again with no colonies. Germany, 454, which I feel is a bit much, and Japan, 280. These primarily follow the trend of being a bit above double their starting EC, getting most of their build slots from dispersed or concentrated industry. This trend also applies to secondary powers, like the British Raj, going from 72 to 208 EC, or the Republic of China, from 92 to 242 EC. Where this gets interesting is when looking at the countries of Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Remember, they start the game with an EC of 34, 43, and 25 respectively. If they were to follow the trends of the other countries, they should have a max EC of a bit over 100 for Argentina and Brazil, and maybe 60 to 70 for Chile. Now, by following only the historical political focuses and taking any of the appropriate industry focuses, they go up to 140 EC for Argentina, 118 for Chile, and this is insane, a whopping 258 for Brazil. This means that Brazil goes from less than half of China's EC and around 60% of India's to surpassing them when all maxed out, and Brazil nearly matching the UK, or at least the mainland UK for EC. And since EC is a contributor for becoming a major, Brazil is now more likely to become a major in the late game than the Raj, and by extension any other of the Commonwealth minor nations. So let's dive into how these focus trees work and see what is getting these countries all this EC. Argentina is actually very fair in its EC gain. A majority of its build slots come from industrial and military focuses, generating 30 EC directly, which is mostly directly giving them factories. Chile, a country with less than a third the population and less than two-thirds the number of states, is overtuned to nearly catching up with Argentina. In terms of focuses, they get 40 build slots directly from the focuses and their accompanying decisions. What puts Chile over the edge, however, is the forestry company industrial concern they get. Remember how Bulgaria, a country that simply was actually actively involved in the war, has an annoying to get political advisor that increases max factories in a state? Well, that advisor only gives 10% factories in a state, along with some other small buffs. However, Chile's industrial concern gives 30% factories in a state. Comparing these two nations, Bulgaria has a larger population than Chile at this time, and without expansion reaches a max EC nearly 30% less than Chile. This is quite simply newer DLCs being overtuned and offering more power creep. But Chile is nothing compared to Brazil. While Chile only gets about a 250% increase in their EC, Brazil's EC increase is actually straight up 500%. At the start of the game, Brazil has this modifier, neglected state, on several of their states that don't have large population centers, which reduces max factories in that state by 40%. Getting rid of this modifier is, admittedly, a nice way for players to feel like they're building up their country by improving the states and improving these modifiers. There is a slight problem with balance here in that several focuses give more than plus 10 building slots in total, in addition to other bonuses. And other focuses also give a variety of other states more max factories percent. In one test game, the state Amazonas, the one following the Amazon River, ended up with 10 build slots, which is way too much for a pastoral state that has 160,000 population. Something I will say about the limitations of EC now. Basically, the fastest way to actually increase EC is to expand and annex more and more lands. Thus, to a very small extent, EC limitations drive the narrative of the game. Comparing Chile and Bulgaria, as I did earlier, can, in this context, be seen as a bit of a stretch. Bulgaria does gain land throughout the course of a historical game and actively wants to expand, while a democratic Chile won't be able to get nearly as much EC through conquest. It can be argued that democratic countries like Chile getting slightly more EC without expansion compared to a fascist Bulgaria can actually be good for game balance, which I agree with to an extent. I feel that for democratic countries, they should have more of an incentive to build up a large faction of non-puppet countries or have, and it pains me to say this, decisions like Turkey with the investment portfolios. Or, better yet, a focus like Greece's bedrock of Balkan financial stability that rewards you for basically just diplomatic schmoozing. From this perspective, the trial of allegiance countries feel even worse, since they can just ignore the rest of the world and don't need to do anything special other than spend a bit of political power in order to get rid of negative modifiers and max out their EC to absurd levels. Basically, while some of the very broken buffs from Trial of Allegiance have been fixed, by no means are they all fixed.